Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Gerson, and after serving as superintendent of schools for 29 years, the last 7 of which were in Hanover and Norwich, it's my privilege today to be the moderator for this show. We're going to have a panel discussion with the Vermont Commissioner of Education, Armando Villaseca, and 2 of the local superintendents. I'm going to start by asking the superintendents to introduce themselves to the audience and explain what their districts look like and what some of the challenges are that they're facing. So Tom, we'll start with you.
I'm Tom Christensen, the superintendent of Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union in Vermont. That 4 school districts, Windsor, which is a K-12 school district, a little over 500 students. And we have Weathersfield, K-8 school district, approximately 215 students. Heartland, which is another K-8 school district, comprised of 310 students. And last but not least, we have a high school, which has an enrollment of 70 students. And we're governed, we have a SU board, total of 18 board members throughout the supervisory union. The SU board is comprised of 12 members. And some of the challenges that we face is declining enrollment. As our student population has gone down, it makes it more difficult to provide a comprehensive program at the high school especially. And also school choice comes into play there, and in that all of our towns have school choice, and they choose to go to different high schools throughout the region, some having to do with where parents went to school and some having to do with program athletics. So it's all a variety of reasons, but school choice has an impact on our high school especially. And that also has an impact on funding because of our enrollment decreasing. We have programs that we can't offer, and it impacts the entire situation.
Yeah. Frank.
Thank you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here on the show, Wayne. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be in the company of Commissioner Velasco.
Thank you.
As far as superintendency that I'm in, it's a unique one, as Wayne certainly can attest to. It's an interstate compact, the Dresden Compact, so that involves grades 7 through 12 from folks from Norwich, Vermont, versus as well as the folks in the Hanover area. In addition, we have 2 smaller districts: the Norwich district, which is K through 6, and then the Hanover district on the other side of the river, which is K through 6 as well. Actually, tuition 6th grade into middle school. In any event, so what are the issues that we're facing? What are some of the concerns or problems that are coming down the road for us? And I think Tom's touched upon them. Obviously, financing is always a major issue, and as I was mentioning with the commissioner before we started, luckily for us in Norwich, the CLA went up a tick this time, and that helped bring our local tax rate down a little bit, which is always good. But declining enrollments are an issue that are facing the Upper Valley as well as anybody else. The economic austerity that we've had the past 4 or 5 years continues to be looming on the horizon. And although things are looking to get better down the road, we're still facing an economic downturn in our area, and therefore, jobs have disappeared, populations have dwindled, and even our birth rates have begun to shrink considerably. So we are looking at some population issues coming down the road. Also, as we were discussing earlier before the show started, in these times of shrinking budgets, what do you have to do? You're looking at your maintenance, you're looking at your buildings, and you're saying, well, gee, maybe I can put that off for a year or 2 or 3. And as we all agreed, those things start to pile up. And what cost you $10,000 or $20,000 3 or 4 years ago now costs you $40,000 or $50,000 now. So it becomes a problem that you can postpone, but it's going to catch up with you sooner or later. The other issue that we're all facing, and Commissioner, we talked about this earlier, is the whole accountability system, both in terms of teacher accountability as well as how well are our students doing and how do we know that that is indeed the case. And there's been a lot of discussion and talk about that, whether you look at the Common Core, whether you look at the whole ESEA reauthorization and what that's going to look like. Are we going to continue with NECAP? Commissioner, I know you've engineered and spearheaded the waiver to the federal government to look at perhaps some variance in terms of how the NECAP is being used, and can you give the states a little bit more latitude in terms of how we look at those tests, and are there ways for us to look at them in terms of the Vermont students and perhaps find some opportunities that will be more beneficial to students as opposed to just looking at a reification of numbers that are going to be sent on to some general area. So that's all, I think, extremely important, and we're looking for some opportunities down the road that will get us out of that constant reporting that puts us in a position of, have you made AYP? Have you not made AYP? What are you going to do as a result of it? And I think the other thing is, what can we do as schools to broaden the opportunities for our students beyond the confines of the classroom, whether it's ELOs, extended learning opportunities, whether it's virtual school, whether it's partnerships and apprenticeships and things of that nature through our local Volk Tech Centers and a variety of others, or it's college partnerships, as with Dartmouth College. All those things, I think, play a significant role in getting our kids to be more conversant in their discipline as it's applied to the real world. So those are some of the things I think we're all looking at.
Well, now, you've sort of heard the perspective, I'll say, from 5,000 feet. How do things look at, say, 25,000 feet at the state level? What are some of the challenges you face? And I think probably some of our viewers might be curious about what exactly is your area of responsibility? What do you oversee as a commissioner?
Well, I'll just briefly talk about the Department of Education has regulatory requirements as a result of funding issues that we have to assure that money is getting to the right places. But also our responsibility is to make sure that school districts are providing all of their students with the appropriate level of education as required by the standards. We were talking before about, and we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, later on about some of the statewide assessments and how we found that not all school districts have build curriculum that is aligned to the standards, so that we might have students, and particularly in high school, who may be taking the 11th grade NECAP assessment, the New England Common Assessment Program, which is New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and Rhode Island, for those folks who don't know, that may never have been exposed to, let's say, algebra or geometry. I have probably more of a bully pulpit than I actually have authority, because in Vermont, the authority lies not with Tom, but with his school board, not with Frank so much as with his Norwich board. So I think ultimately, in Vermont, the real power lies locally. Yes, the State Board of Education can set up rules that require schools to do certain things, and of course, a legislator can pass statutes that require us to do certain things. But ultimately, the real important work lies with what they're doing, their principals and their teachers, who are ultimately, providing education for our kids. And I think one of the things that I've been most surprised at in the 3 years, having been a superintendent for 5 years and a principal for about 20, was the conversation often is not about what's in the best interest of kids, but what is in at least perceived to be in the best interest of the adults, whether that be Act 153, which is the school merger legislation, or the fact that we're not aligning our curriculum to what we know students need in order to be successful beyond high school, because it doesn't matter how good our high schools are, a high school diploma in and of itself is not going to prepare our students to a life of middle class income. It's going to probably put them in a situation where they're low wage earners. So I want to go, I think both Tom and Frank have addressed the issues that we're grappling with, and both have talked about the declining student population. And statewide, we're down about over 20% since 1997. Concurrently, our school costs have gone up over that time, so our per pupil costs continue to rise. But if you go to most schools, particularly high schools, it's not like they're offering more and more, but rather they're offering less as a result of tightening budgets. And I think this year is another year, year 3, of some pretty challenging budget problems for school boards as they're trying to put together a budget that is showing as minimal an increase in ed spending, while it's meeting the needs of the kids in Windsor or meeting the needs of the students in Norwich.
But I dare say that you're facing the same kind of budget challenges. I mean, there's more and more expected of state departments of education, and I'd be surprised to hear that you're getting more funding.
No. I've been in the commissioner now for 3 years and a few months, and we've lost about 20% of our staff during that time. Most of it occurred probably 18 months ago. But you're absolutely right, Wayne. We're being asked to do more. And ultimately, when I say more, it's not about the Department of Education or me. It's about how can we provide support for the schools, how can we provide support for the superintendents and principals to improve instruction. We've reorganized our entire department, where we went from 3.5 people when I arrived who were working on school support to now an integrated support for learning team that probably has over 35, 40 employees, whose work is, number one, first and foremost, to work with schools, not to go in with the right answer, but to work with them to provide them the support and the resource they may need to improve the opportunities for their kids.
Yeah, I think I'm speaking for all superintendents when I say that the support that they get from the State Department is also crucial, and school boards at the same time. So I know that there's PTOs who will speak on behalf of the school needs. I just want to make sure that the viewers appreciate how important it is for school districts to get the kind of support that you're talking about. One of the issues that is in the news a lot lately is this whole accountability and the fact that the Obama administration has, in effect, unilaterally decided that they're going to sort of set No Child Left Behind by allowing states to get waivers from some of the accountability requirements. I wonder if you could share with the viewers what Vermont is doing in that regard, and then I'd like to ask the superintendents to kind of weigh in on what their perspective is as to how that might play out in their school districts.
Well, you know, and I really am more interested, I think, folks, hearing what the folks in the field are working on. But ultimately, the system that we have in place right now, the No Child Left Behind, and Frank mentioned something earlier about the reauthorization process not occurring. But when No Child Left Behind was passed, it was based on each state's assessment, an accountability system in each state that would tie into the federal. And that accountability basically worked on one assessment. So all of our states, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Maine, Rhode Island, doesn't matter where, were basically being determined, a school district, a school, a state, success or not, whether students met the standard in one test. And I think, as we know how kids learn differently, that to say that any one of us, commissioner included, if it was up to one test, I'm not sure if I'd be sitting at the table. So the key is, how do we come up with a model that is more reflective of the needs of students and outcomes in a different way, in multiple ways. So what Vermont has done, and I think other states are doing this as well, the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, has proposed a waiver to No Child Left Behind out of his frustration with the House and Senate Ed committees in Washington not being able to get their act together to come up with a system that is more reflective of what really is going on in schools. So what Vermont is doing right now, we initially requested to not have to test annually. And I was just explaining to you all, and by the time people see this, everyone else will know about it, so I'm not, letting anything out of the bag, that we requested to only test students in grades 3, 5, or actually 4, 6, 8, and 11. The federal government came back last week with a letter saying, we appreciate you're looking at things outside the box, but the secretary that's a non-starter for him. So you must have assessments in every grade 3 through 8 and 11. It wasn't unexpected, but we thought that let's push the envelope a little bit. Because one of the challenges that we have is, how many tests can we give kids to determine whether they're being successful or not? Right now, the 4 states in New England, we give the NECAP, but students also take the NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and TIMS and others that are really should be confirming what our state assessments are doing. Then the kids take the SAT or ACT for college. What we would hope is that the new assessment that comes out in 2014, which is called SBAC, Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia, for 38 states, all 50 of us, well, not quite, because Texas and a couple of others haven't joined, are all having this common standards. So whether you're in California, Vermont, New Hampshire, or Florida, we are all being assessed on common standards, and only using 2 different assessments instead of currently we have 45, 42, I'm not quite sure the number. And the New England states, just to step back, and this has nothing to do with me, but we're very forward thinking. When 10, 12 years ago they started working on 1 set of common standards for the 4 states and 1 assessment. So we're a model for the rest of the country. So then if these assessments are tied to what they call, and I hate to use this educational lingo, but internationally benchmarked. So they're set at a standard that would be competitive with other countries. And the assessment is given across the country with common standards. Do we really need to take the NAEP? Do we really need to take some of these others? And couldn't higher ed, couldn't colleges say, SBAC could be part of our application process and part of the, so I think we have to find ways of making it more relevant to students as well as meaningful to local superintendents, local school boards, and ultimately, does it help the teacher in the classroom to look at the results of that assessment and be able to make a determination, a diagnostic determination, where our students are, what they need, and what we need to go back and maybe fill the holes. Additionally, we're looking at other measures besides just a test. One of them could be something as easy as the course selection process that high schools require of their students, looking at secondary schools. If you have higher standards and students are taking higher level courses, that says something about the school's accountability versus a school that may have minimum requirements. We're looking at students doing internships and practicals. I want to go back to something that Frank said before, that application of learning. I'm doing something theoretical, I'm doing geometry in class, that's the theoretical piece. How does that apply to the future of my world? How does it apply to a practical? How does geometry work? I look around this room and I see thousands of geometric shapes and sizes that could be part of a learning experience. So how do we take it from the theory to the application so that the students start seeing a connection between what they're learning in school and what it means to them outside of school?
So you've given a good description of how this looks at the state level and the political machinations that are occurring there. How does this accountability play out in your schools?
Well, I'm looking forward to the possibility of having more reliable assessments at the local level that are going to be inform our practice better and improve instruction for kids. I also think there's, right now we have our high school is a Tier 1 high school needing improvement. From what I've read about the waiver, there's the opportunity there for additional resources from the state to help us continue to improve student achievement in our high school.
And just for the people who might not be familiar with our term, a Tier 1, how do you get to be a Tier 1 school? Is this?
It goes by your scores, the assessments, the NECAP scores, and it has to do with particular subgroups that don't meet AYP, adequate yearly progress, as described in NCLB. So, No Child Left Behind. So it's a process that we're working through right now. We have a school improvement grant from the state, and we're working with people in the Department of Education who are monitoring our progress and providing resources to us. And we're starting to see improvement. And I think that what I've read, again, about the waiver is there's a possibility of even more support and to help us move further ahead.
How does it play out in Hanover and Norwich?
A couple of things the Commissioner said, because it sort of plays into my answer. He talked earlier about the role of local school boards, and I think he's absolutely right. For example, let's take Norwich. There's more of a sense of stewardship on the part of the Norwich board. What I mean by that, they're very concerned about the community's welfare. How does the school reflect the community? How does the community become part and parcel of what the school is? So there's a sense of an overarching blend of community, school, all working together towards the same aim. So their job is to work with me as the CEO, if you will, to try and generate those kinds of activities, programs, learning experiences that are going to best exemplify and reflect where the community would like to be. So it brings into play your PTOs and your communities coming in, the families coming in and talking to the schools and the teachers about what's happening and what's not happening. So there's more of that local control where the school board is working with us, superintendents, not, okay, you're in charge, give us the answer, but give us informed opportunity so we can make decisions that are going to best reflect where we think our community would like to go. So then the commissioner talked about the geometry example, and I think it's perfect for Norwich. So you teach your kids principles of geometry. Then you go out to a town like Norwich and you say, look at the rich architectural history we have in this town. Let's have our kids go out and start drawing replications of what they see. What kinds of geometrical figures do you find there? Are they consistent with energy saving? Are they more for pleasing the eye? And a whole variety of other things. We're celebrating our 250th anniversary this year in the town of Norwich. So again, another wonderful opportunity to have kids go out and work with the town, take the principles, not just geometry, but others, and apply them within the community. Now parents and community folks realize what you're doing and they want to play too. So it becomes more than just school being school, it's school being part and parcel of the community. And again, that's all goes back to the school board playing the right kind of role to allow that all to occur.
A part of the waiver process is, as I understand it, and I may not have my facts straight on this, that you need to link in some way, shape, or form teacher evaluation with the test results. And that has struck some very responsive chords in the couple of states that have already been down the path. How will Vermont take that issue on?
Well, we're working on that right now, and I want to say one thing in supporting what Frank was saying, that that school work, if you will, going into the community, people who may never have been to school or hadn't been to school in 30, 40 years, all of a sudden see Tommy out here measuring angles and figuring out math and using, that starts sending a subliminal message, if you will, that the learning doesn't just occur in school. People who may never have, we have a perspective on school for those of us who maybe don't work in schools, the way it was when we were there. So that's the picture that we have. When you see third graders, sixth graders, whatever it is, out in the school doing math, asking questions about history, aesthetics, angles, and then somebody asks, well, why are you doing that, Tommy? And they, well, we're doing that because we're doing a geometry project, and that project requires community geometry alive. I don't know, what you call it. So it's those little things of bringing folks into school, videotaping classrooms, getting the message out of all the wonderful work we do in school, which I think we miss.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say. Well, I'll tell you why we miss it is because I am a firm believer in what gets measured gets done. And there is no metric that is asked for by the federal government or by the state to determine the extent to which youngsters are engaged in the life of the community. And it strikes me that there is an opportunity for us to rethink the metrics. That'll be a subject for another show, but anyway.
Yes, but that's an application of learning, and where you may see that actually play out, where the accountability, different than the federal, is the nays and yays at town meeting. So I think that's a piece. And I will talk about that, but I know Frank's, I jumped into his question, so I want to...
I just want to just add something to that. If you use your own experience, and certainly I think all of us will attest to this, that you remember far more the incident or activity that had an audience attached to it, whether it's the school, the community, or wherever the audience may be, versus I got a 95 on my geometry test. You're probably not going to remember. You're not going to remember the vocabulary words that you studied that week. But you are going to remember the Shakespeare Festival, and you are going to remember what happened in the Medieval Festival, or whatever festival you're involved in. So the learning becomes connected. It becomes more in your, the right word, but part of your experience. And so you're not going to forget it down the road. I think that's important.
Right. So then back to the harder question. I am a firm believer that we do need, with the Secretary, and I think many people we do need to start looking at teacher evaluation being tied to student outcomes. I don't think it should be the only thing. I don't think it should be the main focus of it, but there has to be a component. And one of the areas when we proposed our waiver, the initial waiver that did not have annual testing, and the federal government said, thanks for the effort, but that's not going to work. It wasn't just about not doing annual testing, but also the fact that if you don't do annual testing, then you can't go back and look at data where you're following students and through the teachers they've had to say, you know, everyone who's had Armando, the students are leaving less prepared than they were when they came in, let's say. Mm-hmm. And not that should be the only measure of my professionalism, but it should be a component of it. And yes, there are those who I think are concerned about tying student outcomes to a teacher evaluation, because in any classroom you could have kids who are coming from very well-supported families who are providing them with enriching experiences, travel, reading to them, and sitting right next to that child could be a child who lives in poverty, whose parents both are working, you know, 2 jobs, are not getting the support that they need at home. So I understand that. But if we look at students where they are and look at a growth model, then I think we can start looking at the impact that the 6 or 7 or 8 hours a day of school has on students. Where right now, the kneecaps measure, did Frank and Tom meet the 4th grade standard? Right. They missed it by this much. It doesn't tell how much they've grown. So it's not really a model that's set up to tie in teacher evaluation. We have to be very careful, because as a principal and a superintendent, I'm going to use my own experience. As a principal of a large high school, Essex High School, I was evaluating about 40 teachers a year. There's no way that I could do an adequate job of that for everyone. So I focus on maybe some of that subgroup, or focus on the folks who need the most support. But then how do I then provide the evaluation mechanism that could tie into their student outcomes if I have that many teachers to evaluate? So we have to come up with a model where we're using teachers, where we're using lead teachers, you know, mentor teachers, whatever we call them in the building, that would help at least with a level of that. But assuming, you know, I go to a mechanic, I get my hair cut, I go to the dentist, based on recommendations from others, based on their performance. So I think to not expect to have some level of accountability of student outcomes with a teacher evaluation, a principal evaluation, a superintendent evaluation, a school board evaluation, if you will, then I think we're not going to be able to be successful in whatever comes forward from the federal government, because Secretary Duncan and the President have been very clear that they will expect these. The question is, can we set up a system that is fair, equitable, and really helps improve teachers, and those that aren't able to improve, that then we help them find another career.
And let me just ask one follow-up, and then I want to go back to the... So when this waiver passes into effect, will the state then in turn to school districts and say, you need to overhaul your local evaluation system and make sure that it includes this as a component? Is that what's on the horizon?
Yes. If the waiver is successful, then all of the evaluation systems in every school district in the state will have a component of teacher evaluation tied to student outcomes. We're not saying that it has to be 10%, 30%, 50% of the weight of their evaluation, but they will. And actually, the waiver is going to require that, I think it's the 2013-14 school year, a pilot be in place and fully implemented by, what would the next be, 14-15? Mm-hmm. That we have a system in place. Now, where that becomes a challenge is in Vermont, we have 75, 80, 100. New Hampshire, probably the same thing, different models for teacher evaluation. So we have to come up with some bookends and say, your evaluation must include these components. We can provide support, professional development, but if you're outside of these, then we can't probably possibly support you.
And I'll let Frank talk first. Give us an idea of some of the problems that might create, or some of the opportunities that it might create.
Sure. I mean, go back to what the Commissioner earlier said about being able to evaluate your entire faculty. And I think the problem, and you were certainly right on the money, as evaluators, we tend to focus on those teachers most in need. Mm-hmm. So let's assume that Wayne is a very good teacher. I'm going to spend my time on with Tom, because
Right.
Tom needs my help. So I have an improvement plan. I have
That's right.
commissioner going in and perhaps doing some other evaluations and some other observations to try and find a way to get him bolstered to be a more successful teacher. Meanwhile, I have a very good teacher over here who's getting absolutely no attention whatsoever. So we are doing ourselves a tremendous disservice by not offering support, resources, and commendation to our really good teachers and giving them an opportunity to become even better. So one of the things we're doing in SAU 70 is walkthroughs. And so I've asked all the administrators to spend 5-10 minutes in every classroom, walk through, get a sense of the pulse of what's happening in the class, understand how the kids and the teacher are interacting, and pick up on the vibrations, and then get back to the teacher about that. And when it's good, let him or her know that. When things aren't going the way you think they should, have a conversation about it. Because as historically as we all know, oh, gee, it's February, I got to do my 5 or 6 evaluations. So I'm into Wayne's class, yeah, and it's the first time I've been in there in 6 months. So I mean, we got to get away from that and have this more continuous formative evaluation with our faculty. And I think kids appreciate seeing the principal or assistant principal or even superintendent coming into the classroom and being a part of the class. So it's an ongoing opportunity, and everybody, I think, gains by the experience.
How do you see this playing out in your district, Tom?
We've just moved to a new teacher evaluation model this year, and that's part of
That's
the SIG grant requirement to do that. And it's based on research, national experts like Charlotte Danielson. Our model is based on her work, and we're starting to see some real improvement in instruction in the classroom. We're coupling that with work for all of our teachers in the Skillful Teacher, that program, so that linking that with the evaluation model, and we did a lot of training with our administrative staff this past year. We think we're going to start seeing some improved instruction, some greater gains in student achievement. The piece that I'm concerned about is that we now have to move into the evaluation model, or revising the evaluation model for our administrators. It's a year and a half it's going to take us for everyone to go through Skillful Teacher training, so that the entire SU, all 4 districts, will have that training.
And the SIG schools just are our models, because the SIG schools, in order, as part of the agreement to accept the money and participate, they had to agree to come up with an evaluation system that included all of these components. Not that it's going to be the be-all, end-all, but Tom's district and others like that will be helping identify some of the challenges, obstacles, and strengths of such a system before we implement something fully statewide, even though they were required to do that as part of their the requirements. But I also think that one of the challenges that I have as having been in school, when I went into this business, I didn't go into this business to be a commissioner or a superintendent or a principal. I went into the business to be around kids. I like being around kids. I think that, Frank's point about principals and superintendents, and I live this, needing to be visible in the classroom. You pick up a lot when you walk into a classroom for a few minutes. So that after a while, when Superintendent, Villaseca walks into the room, nobody even turns around. It says, oh, he's in, he's participating, he's doing a presentation. Because then, when a parent calls me or somebody says, well, in Mr. So-and-so's class, this happens, I say, well, you know what, that's not true. I'm in his class at least once a week, and this is what I see. At the same time, if I see Wayne doing something that I may question, I'll actually say, Wayne, why are we doing it this way?
Yeah.
And then you could explain to me. I said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Can you share that with Tom, who's struggling with the same thing?
Right.
And I think, plus, you get your message out. If you're the superintendent or the principal, you manage them by walking around.
Exactly.
One of those old models.
Exactly.
And then if you could tie that into the evaluation system,
Yeah.
it's a much more rich and wealthy system for everyone involved, ultimately best for kids.
Right.
And that was another piece I wanted to add that I think is critical to our growth, is creating professional learning communities where teachers have the support not just of their administrators, but the support of their colleagues, and working together, whether it be grade level or subject area, to improve their skills and to just learn.
I want to go around last word because we're running out of time.
Oh, okay.
If you have any points that you wished that you had made but didn't get a chance to. Or
The one thing I think it's been particular challenge in this budget season for our school district has been Act 153 in terms of the assessments, the SU assessments. By moving part of our special ed, we haven't moved all of the special ed to the SU, but technology, transportation, it has increased the assessments, and people are not understanding. It's a difficult process to try to educate them, and it's going to take over time, because initially they think as soon as you move something to the SU, you're going to see savings, immediate savings within the local district, and it doesn't work that way. It takes time, and as we shift these services over.
Yeah, and let me say what I think is happening so that the viewers can catch on, because I think we're all conversant with this.
Right.
But basically you had functions that were being done at a district level that are now being done at a central level.
Right.
And so consequently the costs are still there, they're apportioned differently.
Right.
And there might have been an anticipation on the part of some board members and taxpayers that, oh, great, when it goes to the SAU, I guess money will fall from heaven to pay for it. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. None of us have printing presses.
But I think it's a good starting point, because over time, I think we will start to see some savings as we start to share services among the districts in the SU.
Yeah. Right.
I want to go back to something we talked about before the show even started, and it goes to your question. So when you have a really good school board association and a really good superintendent's association and a strong commissioner, those three entities coming together and working collaboratively with the districts around the state of Vermont, I can't tell you how much that makes us as superintendents want to go to the meetings and be a part of the conversation, but also gives us a sense of support in that we know those organizations are going to help us out. So whether it's learning something new about what's happening, more incentives coming through in terms of state grants, or just us coming forward and say, look, here's what we've done that seems to work really well. Maybe Tom and his group would be interested in doing that. That's very healthy for us, and I can't say enough good about that.
I just want to chime in on that. Just the other day, I had a situation that I called the State Department of Education. I pick up the phone, I get the person I need to talk to.
Yeah.
And he's responsive right away. I got an answer. And that's been my experience with the Department of Education. It's really been a good experience.
Okay. Thank you. That's good to hear. And we are a small state, and one of the things that people sometimes are surprised at, somebody sends me an email or calls a commissioner, I call them back. I was here in Hartford High School yesterday doing a presentation to a Spanish class at the high school, because I like to keep, I think it's important. I'm just occupying this seat for hopefully a few more years, but just for a limited period of time. But people have long memories. Tom's experience will be a positive one that will go with him and he'll share with others, versus if he had a negative experience, that also travels for a long time. And I think ultimately it's not about me or the department, it's about how do we improve opportunities for kids, and how do we make sure that all of our kids are challenged and provided the supports to be successful. And I would love to be able to talk at some other point, talk about our student outcomes. I think that, I met with a group of people from IBM yesterday who's, they're concerned about our math results of our students. And if you look at that, we have a crisis, and I'm starting to write something now about it. We have a crisis in our boys. Young men are not being anywhere near successful as our young women, and not just in math, across the board. Post-high school continuation rates are lower in boys than they are in young women. So, years ago we focused on young women science, math. I think we did a wonderful job there and need to continue it, but we also need to look and focus on our young boys, who I think are maybe not being as successful as we would like them to be. So at some other point. So to me, I want to talk about opportunities for kids, as well as, Act 153 and mergers and those other things.
Well, appreciate the three of you taking time out of your busy schedule to come and share with the viewers the challenges you're facing and the successes you're experiencing. And I hope the folks watching will focus on those successes, because too often we only read the adverse news about education, and people work really, really hard in the classrooms and in the central offices and deserve a lot of credit. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Appreciate it.